Okay, here we are, our very last HOA. Kind of sad.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, after a whole semester, it's kind of weird to know that we're done. So,
Yeah, this is it. I know.
okay, how about we just take every other question, and then, like, I'll do the first one, you can talk about the second one, and we can both talk about the answers, but we'll just go back and forth that way. Is that okay?
Yep, that sounds good.
Okay, so for the first question, what doctrine in Wilbur's heart drove him to advocate? And why is the doctrine of the family so important to have in our heart to be passionate and persistent? So the first part of that question is I really felt like what drove him was that feeling that all men were created equal and that all men should be free. He was tenderhearted anyways, but it was almost, I could almost see that in him, that um, I mean, he treated animals with kindness and compassion, and so the idea that men could be treated poorly and held in slavery was more than he could handle.
Yeah, I agree. I think the other thing that I saw was the doctrine of God. Along with that, everyone is equal and everything is equal. And I think that's what brought those feelings, is because he said God had found him. He hadn't found God, God had found him. I like that comment. And I
That was,
think he once he realized that God had found him and that he needed to focus more on the world around him and what God has created than on himself, that I think his whole focus probably changed. And that's what drove him to be such an advocate for whatever it was, whether it was the slavery issue or rather it was animals, and stopping and helping and protecting. But like he had mentioned, just noticing the little bugs around him, noticing the leaves on the trees, noticing all God had created.
yeah, yeah. Well, I love that part of it. I love that part of him that we got to see.
Yeah,
So, why is the doctrine of the family so important to have in our heart? To be passionate and persistent. I really felt like in watching the movie, I felt like for Wilbur that this was truly written on his heart, that he could not live in almost any other way. Once his friend William Pitt, the guy who became the prime minister, once he said, "You can do both. You can serve God and advocate for the slaves, work to end slavery. You can do both." I felt like that's really totally what drove him.
yeah,
That idea, and it was written on his heart. So I think we need that same kind of feeling inside. I don't know that we have to sacrifice in the same way that anybody else does, because we're all different, and so I don't think that we have to do exactly what he did in order to be an advocate. But I think we need to have that same feeling inside.
yeah, I agree. I think when something is written in your heart, I think you have a passion and desire for that. So, being passionate about something gives you the drive to push forward, to focus, to fight for, to stand up for, whatever it may be, whatever that passion is. I think once it's there, like it's like a flame behind you, and it keeps you forging forward and pushing through, like his health, the ups and downs. And I think everything you do revolves around that passion and that revolve to make things better.
Uh-huh.
And I think that's what written on your heart really is, and what keeps you persistent is that passion it brings.
Right. I totally agree. I totally agree. Okay.
Okay, so question number 2 then is, how did Wilbur employ a theoretical Bronfenbrenner approach to become a more effective advocate? So on that, I'll go through each of the systems and how, I saw them affected by him. I think he focused on each specifically really well. In the microsystem, he had the priority of helping and being around family and friends. Like it showed him always with and always talking to and always fighting for family and friends, and he stood up and supported them, and they did the same for him. You know, it was obvious that in this system it was one for all and all for one. You know, they were supporting each other, and just like you had mentioned, the one that became prime minister, he said, you know, his fight is my fight. And I think that's how they were together, and that's in this microsystem. He was a loyal friend and confidant to those that he had as family and friends. And then I think in his house and in his community, he never turned others away. He fed. It showed him just feeding, you know, numerous people in need and giving to the beggars and those less fortunate, as well as animals. You know, it showed, you know, he talked about all his different pets, and, you know, and it showed some of those too.
Right.
And he would just give unselfishly to all of them. And then in the mesosystem, he brought his community, friends, peers, and family together, I think, in his home by feeding them and having the meetings and making sure that all felt his respect and his protection. I think he was kind of a protector in a lot of ways.
Right.
And then in the ecosystem, I saw that he was very active in the council, the parliament. He took an active role in defending and standing up for his beliefs and trying to push those values and passions to make a difference in you know, in this area. And then in the macro system, he worked to give freedom to all, like the slaves, the animals. He felt that in every society, any belief system, regardless the culture, everyone should be protected and given equal rights and protection. And so he fought diligently for this. He felt that religion, ethnicity, culture, nothing made anyone less of a person to Wilbur, and he let his voice known regarding this. So those are kind of the things that I came up with in each specific system.
Yeah, those are great. Okay, so for the microsystem, we both noticed the friends. He was really influenced by his friends, but also worked on influencing his friends. And I thought as part of the microsystem also was the fact that he was taking care of others. That might be mesosystem more than micro, but the idea that he was, so when he brought people together, which would probably be mesosystem, but when he brought, like, the group, when they first met together, it was all about feeding people. And in fact, at one time when he had invited people from the House of Lords to come to this meeting to find out about slavery, they brought food, and I remember one of the comments in the movie was, well, you know, are you taking all that in for them? And he's like, well, I'm very optimistic about how many people will come, or something like that. So he was working to bring all of that together. Within the exosystem, I thought that his work with the House of Lords was the most important, the policy, the government. He was working on changing that specifically. And the macro system was society in general. In fact, I like the part where he tried to show people within society what was going on. The tour that they took on the boat where they end up at the slave ship, that was part of showing society in general that was part of his effort in trying to advocate.
Yeah, that was good. I like that.
Anything else for that one?
I don't think
that one was a little bit harder for me. This is one that I had to talk with my friend about, because it's like, okay, I know what these systems are, but I'm trying to pick apart the movie. And
yeah, it was a little more difficult to put each of his aspects into systems. And like you said, I think microsystem and mesosystem, they kind of intermingled, and that's what the mesosystem is. But
right. Right.
You know, it was hard to kind of distinguish the two a little. But I think regardless, you know, it was him bringing each of those together to be stronger and helping all of them.
Right.
So.
Right. Okay, question 3. Are you ready?
Yep.
Okay. How did Wilbur and his fellow advocates how do and share their research? Oh, yeah. How did they do and share the research? What evidence did they provide to persuade those opposing or on the fence? So, a couple of the things that I thought about were gathering the signatures that he produced in the House of Lords that one particular time. That was one of the, to show that there were all of these people who supported the idea of ending slavery. He also had another thing that I thought was really important. They also had Equiano's book, and that was part of that story of knowing exactly what was going on and what happened. The people, the general society, did not understand or know what was going on in those ships, and so it was important that Equiano share his experiences so that others could know. And then the last one that I wrote down about was the guy, and I don't remember his name, who goes to the West Indies and he comes back and he talks about the things that he saw happen in the process of purifying the cane sugar and the people who were burned and the children who rolled over into the fire. And so that also was part of that whole research that went into it, because society in general was just happy to have sugar and didn't think about the process of what it took to get that sugar to their table.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that was really good. I think, and I mentioned a lot of those. I think the signatures and, you know, what they did to get those and to show those, and then also, um, I think the tour that you had talked about in the last question was a big part of this too.
Oh,
You know,
yeah.
he showed the opposers these slave ships. He wanted them to live that, to experience that, and he kept driving it in. Now smell, now breathe in. This is what, and I just love that he kept reiterating that. You know, he was trying to bring it home, like, I want you to live and experience this. This is death. This is what they go through. And, you know, the shackles and the wretched state that they are hauled for all these miles and days overseas. He really wanted to help them truly feel the experience of what slavery was really about. And then testifying and witnessing to this in word and evidence. You know, I think, you know, the passion that was behind it in word and description was, it brought people to tears. Not only the smell of death, but I think the passion behind what he was saying and what they went through. And so I think for me that was a large part of the evidence that he brought to persuade those. And, you know, that would work. That would work for me for sure.
Definitely.
So, and I think, you know, just by seeing that, I think it touched and worked and made an impact on a lot of them. So, but
One
I
of,
loved the,
oh,
oh, sorry.
oh,
I
go
was
ahead.
just going to say, I love that you mentioned the book. I hadn't mentioned that, but that was a huge aspect. And
Yeah.
he, however many sold, and how he could tell his story. And I loved when they first initially met and he had him go down to the shipyard. And he said, I didn't really know what I was going for. But then he told his story and took him through how he had come across and how he was treated and chained and burned, and, you know, he was branded
Right.
as someone that was owned. You know, I think his passion and story brought the passion into, you know, Wilbur's heart too. And I think where he said, you know, at this time that I was brought across, I was a prince. Like, didn't he say that? I was a prince.
Mhm.
And then now I'm branded as being owned by somebody.
Right.
So it doesn't matter what he was saying. It doesn't matter who you are. Like, you're still nothing to them.
Right. Right.
So.
Well, I was going to say, one of the things on my list of things that I wrote down about their parts of their research, one of the parts that was really persuasive, or one of the things that they really tried to do to persuade other people, was when they brought the signatures in. I don't know if you remember this, but the one guy who was on the opposite side came down and signed the petition in
Yeah.
front of everybody. And that was a big deal, that someone who had been vocally on the other side had changed sides. I just thought that
Yeah.
was great.
And I love that he had come to that one meeting where they had brought all the food,
Yeah,
and they walked in and he's like, you know, holy cow or whatever. And he said, well, not quite, but
yeah,
anyway, he,
yeah,
he was starting, I think, to see the light a little at that point, and then the more he related and communicated with them, he is the one that went to the prime minister and said, you need to fight this fight for him because he's not going to. He needs someone standing behind him
right.
on this. And so, I think, yeah, to have him stand up in front of all the constituents, all the lords, and just say, I am signing this petition. And, I think that did make a big, significant difference in that.
Right.
You
And
know,
that was really persuasive. And that's the
yeah,
whole idea, is that because he was able to reach that one guy, that allowed other people to think, well, maybe this isn't. Because by the time they pass it at the end, there's like 200 and something to get rid of slavery, and only like 17 or something that's against, it keeping it the same. So,
yeah, yep, I agree. Anyway, so the next question, how does the film portray the importance of working together as a group? So I think with that question, excuse me, I think it showed how there is strength in numbers, and how working together, having that additional knowledge, that additional skill, that additional expertise, that additional passion can help drive anyone and keep you pushing forward, because it's not going to be easy. And, as he was telling his story, Wilbur would say, we should have passed it then, and it should have happened then, but it didn't. And there was a time, and there was a process, and it was heart-wrenching and difficult, and the things that they had to go through to finally get that. I think just having one another, being so supportive, and the different strengths that each other brought is what, shows the importance of working as a group. And even though I've learned, so what has family advocacy group work taught you? So even though I have learned that one voice can make a difference, which I think is an important takeaway, one voice can make a difference, I have also learned how important it is to rally together in numbers for good, to bring strength and value to many to help fight the fight of family advocacy. The opposing have numbers and strengths and will fight a good fight. So those advocating for family need to stand up and fight together with the same or more force, passion, and strength. And so I've just learned that working as a group can do that. It is strength in numbers, and having each other's knowledge and expertise and drive and passion can just fortify you with your values and passions, and I think strengthen you for the good.
I agree. So, my thoughts about the whole idea about working together as a group. I'm glad you mentioned the importance of having a voice, and that one person can make a difference. But the idea behind the group, in fact, in I think it was last week's reading, was that we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We can find groups out there that will help us work toward the groups that we share a common values with and goals with. The thing that I got about the idea of working with a group, though, and you kind of touched on it, was that within a group, we combine the efforts and the differing abilities of many. That it's the fact that you take all these different people who are different, have different experiences, have different strengths and different talents, and you use them collectively in your efforts to advocate. And so the group that they brought together within the movie, they were all different. They were all kind of their own little oddball selves, kind of. But they worked together, and it was because they were different that they could reach and do what they had to do. I just really thought that it's the combined effort of people who are different that makes a group so strong.
Yeah, I agree. I loved when they were having each of those people come in that he had brought together, set up this meeting, and he was explaining and describing each one of them. He's from here and he does this, and she's from here and this is what her passion or her work is. And so he, went through each individually what their strength, what their passion, what their work was. And then when they sat all down together, he's like, so, what do all these people have to do with me, Right. And that's really what it is, saying there's more to this than just your finding God. You can do both. There was a priest there,
Right.
There, and he was passionate about God also, but he was still doing these other things. And I think bringing all of them together and all the work that they were doing, he could see that, this would only strengthen him, but not only that and their strengths, but also that he could do both. Like he was seeing that others were doing both, and it was possible, and that just made them better at what they were doing.
Right. I think it made them stronger.
Yeah.
Because they were all different.
Yep. Just those strengths you can bring to each other.
Right.
And, that knowledge, it reminded me of the group at the UN, that we read, A Sacred Duty, and how they were from all walks of life, but the strength and, knowledge that they brought for each other. Some were skilled at this, and some were good at that, and some, could calculate the numbers, and some could, anyway, just all those strengths working together is what makes it a whole. So,
yeah.
Anyway.
I agree. Okay, are we ready for the next question?
Yep.
Okay, what parallels do you see between Wilbur and Captain Moroni? And then from there, what is a Christian and professional family advocate, and how did Wilbur exemplify that? And how can you be effective and Christ-like against loud and often degrading voices? So the parallels, I went back to the scriptures to read Alma 46, and the parallels I saw between Wilbur and Captain Moroni were that, and it wasn't until I actually read it again, because I was thinking about Title of Liberty and all of that, but Moroni faced a really strong opponent in Amalickiah, and I don't remember the guy's name in the House of Lords, but there was one guy on the opposing side who was the voice of the opposing side, and in fact, when they were trying to push that through that legislation that was really boring about the flags and all that, and they were trying to go another way at getting rid of slavery. It wasn't, this guy on the other side realizes what's happening, and he's running through the building trying to find, the people that are on his side to help support getting rid of that. Anyways, it reminded me of the story of Amalickiah and the story of Captain Moroni, is that he had a definite person who was on the other side who was fighting against what Moroni was trying to do. And then what is a Christian and professional family advocate? And did Wilbur exemplify that? I think he absolutely did. Wilbur was not a perfect example, but a really good example of trying to do your best. Oh my gosh.
Somebody really wants you.
I know.
That's okay. Look, it might be super important.
Hold on just a second.
No problem.
Hello? Oh my goodness. Okay, sorry about that.
That's okay.
What that was about. There's nobody there on the phone when I answered it. Okay.
Oh no.
Okay, I lost my train of thought. But oh, one of the things that I wanted to say is that how can we be effective and Christ-like against loud and degrading voices? So at a couple different times in the movie, Wilbur is in the middle of the House of Lords and he's presenting his bill, and the people around him are erupting and drowning him out, and he doesn't fight back. I mean, he tries to make his voice heard, but he's not confrontational when everything around him is boiling over. And I just thought that that was a really good example of what kind of attitude we should have when we're surrounded by that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think that's great. Good comments. For me, so I think with Captain Moroni, I think the comparisons are the passion and the drive for their beliefs and values. And they were both willing to make a stand, regardless of the impact that it had on them or their own lives. They were willing to make a stand. They did not worry about others, what they were thinking, or those who opposed them. They stood up and let their voices be heard, regardless. And they let their voices be heard for not for their own betterment, but for the betterment of everyone else. You know, they were both protecting others, is what they were doing. And then a Christian and professional family advocate is someone, I believe, who follows Christ and is passionate about and willing to fight for their own beliefs and values, not only for the betterment of themselves, but for the betterment of others around them. And I think Wilbur exemplified this by seeking God's will and serving him, as well as serving and standing up for those around him that he wanted to help and save. I think the biggest key to being effective with Christ-like, despite of these loud, degrading voices, I think for me it's twofold. First is having the Spirit of the Lord and testimony of him with you at all times. I think the guidance of the Lord, and I think we saw that with both him and Captain Moroni, you know, being guided and using the knowledge and the testimony that they had to be able to drive them regardless of what was going on around them and who was opposing them. And then the second thing for me is, like you had mentioned, is not stand up with contention. I think having that conviction and love, but not contending in a hateful way. You know, I think, you know, those are the two big ways that we can be effective and Christ-like with all the opposing that we get. And I think our church leaders have often mentioned this, you know, when it comes to the gay and lesbian communities. You know, they talk about this, how we have to work together and we have to be supportive of them on certain issues, but then we have to stand firm and loving in the other issues that we will not bend on. You know, so I think those are the keys for me.
I agree. That's a great answer. You did a great job.
Well, thank you.
I haven't written out all my answers. I've mostly made notes about, you know, during the movie and things that I thought. So that was an excellent answer to that one.
Thank you. So number 6, Marcia Barlow spoke on persuasive speaking and writing. Did Wilbur and others exemplify any of Marcia's ideas, and how? And I thought we saw her ideas throughout the whole movie, really. You know, Wilbur, I think, was persuasive in building a narrative and building that story of the slaves, you know, with, like we talked about, the tour and the shackles and, you know, the passion that he had behind that and the narrative of their lives and what they, and, you know, how they were brought across and what they dealt with. You know, I think that was a good part of it. And then also, I think him standing up and talking about a friend who had repented and seen the light, and he wrote this song and then started singing Amazing Grace, you know, and how touching and impactful that was. And you could see that. So I think, you know, throughout the movie, we saw it in so many ways. And then him relating this whole experience to and I forget her name now, the one they were setting her up with, or him up with. You know, the whole time him telling the story of everything, and you know, the passion and the reality of everything that he had gone through. And then they tried to help others see and understand their views and beliefs by letting them hear, see, and smell and witness the emotions involved in the reality of what they were trying to fight for. So for me, I think, you know, this is how they did it, is just bringing, you know, all these stories to life for these people, and, you know, having them actually experience a little of what they were fighting for.
So, Marcia Barlow had a saying, and I didn't write it down, but it's the one where you tell a story. It's my story, and then you um, then you make, then you end with the story of us. Do you remember the middle part of that?
Yeah, so it's the story of me, the story
Right.
of you, and then the story of us. Is that how it is?
Right, right.
So,
So I really thought that they did a really good job, especially, okay, so Equiano, his book was the story of me. That was
yeah,
his story. He needed to put that out there so that they could connect with that. Um, and then they end with the story of us and I really thought that the whole movie was kind of set up that way. I thought they did a great job, but they end, or part of that process of getting to the story of us was the tour that takes them to the slave ship. He needed to connect them. So the book about Equiano gave a personal story about what was going on that they probably didn't understand. But he ended with trying to get people to understand what it means for us right now, and to actually give people a taste of that. I really thought it was great. Another thing that was make my history their history, and that was the whole Equiano and that going to see the slave ship. And the other part another note that I wrote was that we need to combine data with story, and I thought they did a great job. So Equiano's book was really important, and it sold out. I forget, you know, the girl that he marries says something about how she stood in line to get it, and you know, all the books were gone within an hour or something. And so they had the story, but it was all of the details about what happened, and all of that research that kind of went into it before, what the shackles actually looked like, and I don't know, there was all these things. It was just I thought that Marcia Barlow obviously, you know, studied him or something, because it could have gone the other way around, but that that her ideas about reaching people and being persuasive were in the movie everywhere I looked. I could pick out stuff of that I remembered from that chapter or that week that we studied her, and I just really was. I thought that the ideas about how to be persuasive were sound. So
yeah, yep, I agree. Good answers.
okay, next one. Number 7. What role did the government, policy, and religious freedom play in the fight of the slave trade? Did you see their political system being pro-family? Why or why not? So I thought that, okay, so taking each of these individually, I thought that the role the government played, well, I saw government and policy as pretty much the same thing. The government passed the policy and sustained it, but the idea was that they keep everything the same. They weren't ready to change. They didn't want to change. They didn't want to rock the boat, and they used the threat of what would happen to their economy as a way of scaring people into the status quo, traditions of their fathers. Religious freedom, you know, other than the fact that I wasn't quite sure how religious freedom played into that, except for the fact that Wilbur was able to live according to his conscience. He had the ability to be vocal and to work towards ending what he saw was an injustice. And so a religion in particular, I didn't see or couldn't see that there was a religion or a specific religious side to that, other than the fact that he felt like he was called of God to do this, and he was able to. He was free to follow his conscience in that way. Did I see the political system being pro-family? I didn't. I don't think that we can demean or mistreat others on one hand and then be pro-family on the other. So even though I don't think that the movie particularly addressed pro-family type issues, I don't think that those go together. So I think that they were not pro-family. But that's just one of those things where I've tried to figure out where pro-family or anti-family stuff came in, and there wasn't a whole lot about families except for that you cannot talk about demeaning another human being on one side and then be pro-family on the other. They don't go together.
Yeah, that's true. That's very true. So I had a lot of the similar things you did for the government. I think, this was they were very much involved because every single meeting in the House of the Lords, this was brought up continually. Strong opinions and opposing about this, and then, like you said, the threat that they had on their livelihood, and that's fine. So we roll over and do this, and France sweep in, and they take everything and they succeed, and where are we going to go? And then with policy, I think, like you said, they were very, very close knit, but I think policy was part because policies, they had to be written. So they argued and fought in the government about it, but they had to get to the point where they fought for these. It wasn't an easy thing for them. They fought for these policies to be passed and go through, and the issues that they brought up they never just brushed aside. They were brought up every single meeting, and it was a continual basis until finally, down the road, things were finally passed. And so it kind of reminded me of that little bill, sitting on the steps, and how long and the process it goes through. This was that little policy and the process that it went through, years and years to actually see something be done with it. And then the religious freedom, what I took from that was that it played kind of a huge part. Not that it was specific religion, like you mentioned, but I think the equality that religion brings to everyone, I think was a big part of this. And Wilbur fought for slaves because of how slavery brought and belittled these humans down to the worth of nothing. And so, having the religious background and knowledge and belief in God, that's what made him fight for his belief and understanding. And he even stood up and mentioned that God made everyone equal. Like, there is no one that is not equal, and God has done this. So that's where religion came into it for me. The political system, I think, at the time did not seem pro-family, for sure. I think that they would, anyone who's going to tear families apart, they're going to go to these other countries, pull husbands and wives and children away from not only their families, but away from their culture, their country, their community. Anything they were a part of that gave them some stability is definitely anti-family. That's not pro-family by any means. And taking them away from this, I think, is what, pulled them apart from their families. And this was saying that, families weren't important, at least to the blacks, at least to the slaves. Families did not matter at all. So that's how I tied in the pro-family, I think.
Well, that's the thing. It didn't really talk. It didn't, in my mind, as I watched the movie, I didn't see a definite pro-family or anti-family thing. But because they saw the slaves um, as less than the regular inhabitants of Europe, of England, of London, because there was a division in the worth of two different groups of people, there's no way they could do what they did with the slaves and then be pro-family on the other side. I can't see how those would be together. Even though I didn't see a specific pro or anti-family thing, just the fact that they saw the slaves as less than the worth of a regular person who lived in London, you can't put those two together. So
yeah, I agree. And tearing them apart from
right,
everything they knew
absolutely,
and separating them. Yeah, that's a huge part, I think. So. Okay, so question number 8. Do you feel that Wilbur used his time on Earth well? How did you see him showing the elements of consecration that Elder Christofferson spoke of? So my answer with that one is yes, of course. I think he used his time very wisely. I think he fought for the good of others. He put his health and his needs second to his beliefs, his values, and his passions. And I think he fought for animals and humans alike. It didn't matter what he was fighting for. He was passionate about it. And he stood up regardless what was going on in his own life to help and protect, all of those. He fought for those who could not fight for themselves. He showed the elements of consecration that Elder Christofferson spoke of by consecrating all his time, energy, and efforts to blessing and helping others. And once he had this passion, and like we had mentioned in that earlier question, once it was written in his heart, there was no stopping him. His life was devoted in abolishing slavery,
right.
And that was his passion, along with some of these other things, protecting animals and so forth, but also by putting the Lord first in his life. And I think, that was a big part of it, is using his time wisely. He put the Lord first, and he tried to do what the Lord would want him to do and see others and other things as the Lord saw them. And then he saw the responsibility to fight for to end slave trade, but for the reformation of society also. And I liked when he said that. I not only feel like I need to abolish slavery, but I need to fight for reforming society.
Yeah.
So I really like that. So I think he did a very good job.
He did. So I obviously think that he used his time on Earth well. I think that what was interesting to me is that he also knew how to use his connections. So he had a friendship with William Pitt before he actually became prime minister. But even during the time that they were working towards getting rid of slavery, he used his friendship not unreasonably, but I think that he used it in a practical way to try and advance his advocacy. Is that he knew that he was friends with him, and that he could help him in some ways. So I really thought that it was an appropriate use of his friendship with William Pitt. And then the different parts of Elder Christofferson's talk was purity, work, respect for one's physical body, service, and integrity. And I thought that Wilbur was definitely pure, at least as far as he understood. That I thought that he was single-minded, and he was not two-faced or duplicitous. He wasn't. He was who you saw. And I thought that he worked hard. I didn't ever show him having a job other than in the House of Lords as a representative, but I thought he did that work well. The respect for his body I thought was really interesting. So when his colitis gets so bad and so painful, he ends up not willingly, but he ends up using painkillers, laudanum, to fight the pain and to continue what he needed to do. And then it was when he finally meets the woman that he's going to marry, and she recognizes the fact that he's taking painkillers, and they're married, and she's expecting the baby, and he's having a particularly bad episode, and she says, "Let me go get it for you. Let me help you." And he said something about how he needed to be clear, that he needed to be able to think clearly, and I just thought that we all learn through our experiences how to respect our physical body in one way or another. And for him, the painkillers helped him to function, but at some point he realized that he wasn't functioning as well as he could if he could think more clearly. Anyways, I really love that part. Service, I thought that that was the embodiment of his life's work, was in serving other people and in fighting for the slaves, and in doing whatever it took to see it through and to make it work. And integrity, I think that went along with purity, at least for me. He really was the person that he pretended to be. I mean, he didn't pretend. It was really who he was. And that he did what he said he was going to do, and that it really, he was truly the person that he put out there, that was who he was.
Yeah, that was very good. Breaking those down, I like that. Thank you for doing that. Yeah, I loved, and I can't remember their names, the couple that he went to stay with who were going to, nurse him back to health. But
right.
Their comment on that it's love. I've lived a long and good, healthy life because I have been married, and love has made me healthy. And I think, like your comment when he did get married and he was going to try to give up, taking painkillers, and I think in the back of his mind he was thinking, I can conquer this now, and maybe that's one of the reasons he felt that love and that support and another way of dealing with it, possibly. So
yeah,
I like that you brought that up.
I agree. Well, the last three questions are kind of personal. I don't know. We can talk about them if you want. I was just going to. I didn't even put any notes on those because I was just going to answer those as I went. But do you want to go through those?
Yeah, we can. I don't know. I mean, I don't mind. I'll go through and just give the answers that I kind of put and what I felt. So, number 9, any other profound thoughts or personal insights from the movie that are related to child and family advocacy? And for me, I think the biggest part is that I believe the movie related to family advocacy because of the passion and fight involved in both. I think Wilbur states his fight as a crusade, and I love that because I see with family advocacy and child advocacy, it is a crusade. That's what it is. It is a fight for the long haul. It's never going to stop. There's never going to be some type of fight that we have to face, like it's been divorce in the past, and gay marriage, and now gay and lesbians, and the different impacts on children, and looking at not a traditional marriage anymore. Anyway, it's a crusade, I think, and as long as Satan is Satan, we will have that fight on our hands. And I think we must never weaken or back down because Satan and his followers will never weaken and back down. So I think it is an eternal fight. So it made me think of, like he mentioned, the crusade. So let me see what else I had. Anything? I think that's kind of what I summed up. on the insights I have.
Right. There were a couple of quotes I really liked. Well, and one of the insights I think I got from the movie, though, like I said, I'm just going to write this when I do it, but
Yeah.
I felt like as I watched from our day and time to something that happened in the 1700s, that I had this sense of just keep going. You're going to be successful. You can make this, and yet it took him how many years? 17 years, 15 years. He talks about specifically, well, 15 because or 17 because 15 until he marries the girl, and then the baby is 2 years old when they finally get are they vote on it and they get rid of slavery, they abolish slavery. So this was quite a process for him, and it was a huge undertaking for him, and um, a sacrifice of his health and his other things that he may have wanted or felt passionately about. This really took from him. But as I watched the movie, I kept thinking, don't give up. You can do this. You're going to be successful. You know, I have the ability to look back and see that his efforts were not in vain, that he was making progress. And so what I thought is that for us, it's probably the same way. In the future, there may be people who can look back at our own stories and say the same kinds of things. Don't give up fighting for what's right. At the time, he probably felt like if he didn't fight it, slavery would be around forever. But we can see from our vantage point that it did come to an end, and that he was able to make a difference. So I wonder if at some point in the future people will look back at what we're doing and think the same kind of thing. Don't give up. Keep going. You're going to be successful. You are making a difference when we can't see that from where we are right now.
Yeah. You know, it made me think as I was watching the movie of the article. One second. Okay. 1 second. Okay, Mommy's almost done. Sorry, my little guy. He's like, okay, your time limit's up. But he said, the article we read a few weeks ago on, and I can't even remember which one it was or who said specifically right now off the top of my head, but it said when they passed gay marriage in, I think, Virginia or Massachusetts or whatever, they said, why do you think you passed it now? And why do you think you passed it in this area? And they said, because in other areas, there have been so many of you standing up and fighting, and there wasn't that number fighting against us. So it was so much easier to get it passed through. And so I thought that they never, ever let their numbers dwindle. They always were increasing and growing their strength. And I think that's a good lesson for us to take away is if we give up or think someone else is going to fight or make the stance, then it's going to be easy for them to pass things through. You know, as long as we are fighting and we have that strength in numbers, then it's good. We're just making it harder for them. So, you know, that's one thing I kind of thought about and took away too. And then the next question with understanding the doctrine, you know, and you know, I think I've always had a fairly good understanding, and I've studied the doctrine of the family and the proclamation and so forth. But one big thing for me, I think, that really stood out is the last sentence, which I don't think I put the emphasis on before this class, of being called on by the leaders of the church and the Lord Himself, when they said calling upon all responsible citizens. And, you know, I think that gives us a call of action. Like they said that right in the proclamation. You know, you need to, it was a call to action for us. And I don't think I ever looked at it specifically like that you need to stand where you are and do something and speak up. And so for me, I think using that time while I'm here on earth to serve the Lord and protect the sacredness of the family was more eye-opening to me after this. And then knowing and seeing and understanding the ways that I can fight. And for being able to stand up for what I believe does not have to be me going to the UN. It can be just the simplicity of standing up and defending that in my family, in my community, in the school system, wherever it is that I'm at and the period I am in my life. I think that's where I can make a difference. And I think understanding and seeing the different levels and different systems that I can make a difference in, has kind of opened my eyes to the reality that it's okay that I'm not, standing up and changing policy, but I am changing the views that maybe my children will have in the future, and I can make an impact on generations by just the influence that I am within the walls of my own home at this point. So,
Isn't that
and
what
then
it's supposed to be too? I mean, isn't that the idea behind why we are at home? It's so
yeah,
that we can affect and help our children get to that same point. I mean, that's the whole
yeah,
purpose. That's why we do what we do.
yeah, I agree. And that ties in perfectly, I think, with the final question about, looking at your spouse and children and some thoughts you have that would benefit them. And I think that's what the benefits are, is the impacts it makes on them and their future lives and their future children and their perspective and the difference that they're going to make in society. So I think everything we do as a parent, specifically as a mother in the home, is an influence we're going to leave on our children, for better or worse, for good or bad. They will see us make that. They'll see that we can make a difference, but not only that, we can let them be part of making a difference right now as children. And when they are able to see that a difference can be made by the little things, they're more driven in the big things too. So
I agree. Okay,
anyway,
excellent. Excellent answers.
good.
Yay.
Well, thank you. That was fun. That was such a good movie.